where the delicate balance between peril and promise perpetually dances, we invite you to embark on an extraordinary expedition. This 8th of March, Atomics on a Friday, unveils a special chapter in our Purple March Madness series. Here, amidst the intricate web of cyberspace, we find Nasreddine Bencherchali, a beacon of insight in the shadowy realms of cyber threat detection. With the precision of a master craftsman, this episode delves into the art of uncovering hidden threats within the digital ether. Nasreddine, our guide through this labyrinth, teaches us to discern the subtle whispers of danger amidst the cacophony of data. Together, we'll learn to harmonize these discoveries with our log sources, creating a symphony of security insights that echo with clarity and purpose. Join us on this special Atomics on a Free Day as we embark on this enlightening quest in the vast expanse of our digital universe, where the delicate balance between...
Awesome. Happy Friday. Yes. Our intern helping us out by adding some interesting words there.
Some unique pronunciations.
Yes.
As well.
My favorite was the master craftsman. But yeah, happy Friday. Welcome, Paul. Well, I'm glad you're back.
I know. Maybe if bad guys stop doing stuff on Fridays, we could not have to miss these.
I know.
So let's speed through this before they start doing bad stuff again.
Yes, let's go. So welcome to the episode 2 of Purple Madness, where we have been digging, or we're starting to dive into all the different topics. If you're new here, this is our 2nd annual Purple Madness. So if you missed last year, there's a bunch of content from last time. The idea is that we bring in different perspectives from different backgrounds and look at CTI, Purple, threat research, detection engineering. And today's is with our good friend, our other co-host. And let me see if I have our... Oh, yeah. So, yeah, today is Nasreddine. I'll bring our third co-host in. There's
Hello.
Animal around here somewhere. Howdy. How's it going?
Hey. Thanks for having me again.
Welcome back.
Yeah. The co-host, if Paul is not here, but the guest, if Paul is here. Okay.
Yep, exactly. Depends on the day of the week.
Yeah. Sometimes we do these on Wednesdays.
Or Tuesdays.
And people question us for it.
Yeah. People start questioning their life if we do this on a Monday.
Very more here than the...
We should send him a t-shirt, that guy, by the way.
I forgot to put that on the slides. It's funny. But yeah, thanks for joining us again, Nas. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
And
for the invite,
helping out on the slides. Yeah.
New background for it. I dig it.
Yes. Yeah. Did you not look at the slides?
No, I did.
Okay.
But it's the who dis slide, so I just keep going through it. I'm like, the first 2 or 3, I got it. And then it's after that is where I look. But maybe I should start looking at the first 3 now as well. Could slid something in there.
Lots of things to be dropping today. Oh, it's fun. All right. Michael Haig, welcome, co-host here on the show. We work at Splunk, threat researcher. You might know me from such projects as Atomic Red Team and the Living Off the Land drivers. Thanks for joining. Paul?
I'm Paul, senior threat hunter at Unit 42, managed threat hunting team. Probably see all of my hot takes on Twitter. Really like to get people going and thinking, really just send things over the edge. I also post some memes occasionally. It's been a while, but you can see some of my great work previously.
Hide the pitchforks, hide. Okay, and I guess it's my turn. Last year, threat researcher at Nextron, Sigma maintainer, and low driver maintainer. And detection engineering enthusiast.
Excellent. The only advertisement I have for this episode is I think today is the last day to get the discounted Constructing Defense by Anton. So if you want to get a sweet course, which apparently has 78 lessons in it, super sweet hands-on labs. We have a episode of it. If you want to go nerd out on that, see what it looks like before you buy. I think today's the last day. It's a really good discount. So yeah, check that out. That's my ad for the day.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's dive in. Nas, you made a lot of slides today, which is great. But
yeah,
yeah,
I made it too official.
Yes,
Sad.
I know. Sad.
Yeah, I made a couple of slides. I treated it like a talk, but it's not a talk because we don't do talks here. We talk to each other. So, but I wanted some structure around like the topic. So,
Yes.
When Mike approached me like a couple of weeks ago, he said, "What do you want to do for Purple Madness?" I said, "I don't know," and this is exactly the result of that. So basically, what I wanted to do is I would give a little bit of a preface, like so that I can contextualize what we're going to talk about. So basically, we read threat reports every day. A lot of us detection engineers read threat reports, and perhaps most of us, that's how we get our like digest or intel on what's going on around the APT world. And I just wanted to share like the mindset of how we approach this report, because in my belief is that there are multiple approaches one could take. As we've seen last year, I believe we've took the approach of every week, like a guest would come and would from his perspective, I believe Anton did purple teaming, I did blue teaming. And yeah, so this year I wanted to take like a step back and let's take a look at what is like the usual techniques that we do when we write detection based on this threat intel. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, everyone's happy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks
We're
for
still
watching.
happy. Twitter's still happy, so we're good.
Yeah. All right.
There's
So
still time.
yeah. So yeah. Basically, like when we read a report, like every one of us who wrote a blog before, you need to fill the gap with the cool stuff. Like the cool stuff is in the middle, but you need that introduction and you need that blah blah blah. Okay. As we've seen, if you're a threat intel analyst, or if you're like your background differ, you might be interested like in tracking the threat actor, and you want to like to be interested in that aspect, like what is the infrastructure, blah blah blah. But if you're a detection engineer, probably the most interesting part for you is the procedures or the techniques that the threat actor like did do. So, do we read full threat reports? No, we do not. So what we actually do is, if you go to we don't do that here. As the slide would show you is, we don't read full threat reports. We just go use a technique that Mike coined last year called a grab and smash, which is a beautiful technique of looking for pictures, and like it's a 5-year-old technique. Show me the picture. I don't want to look at the boring stuff. Yeah. So basically, the idea is when you go through a report, especially if you read a lot of reports every day, like in my case, for example, sometimes we go through 5, 6, 7 reports every day from Mandiant, from Splunk, from whatever, and we just look for these techniques. Okay, so as you can see, there are different types of techniques. Like the idea here is you look for something interesting to take it away and analyze it, and perhaps then make a technique out of it. So like, is this PowerShell interesting for me? Do I cover it? Do I not? Is this JavaScript interesting? Maybe I need to write a YARA rule, a Sigma rule, or a specific query language EDR rule. And yeah, that's the general approach of how I prefer to go through the report, but you do you.
Yeah, that's the hardest part, right? Is if you have a backlog of all these reports, it's spending the time and drilling into each piece. You know, was there something new and novel that makes you stop and think about that? You know,
I think there's kind of two ways you could approach it, which is one is the new or unique or novel way of doing it. The other is the overlaps, right? If I see, let's say, out of 10 reports, these 7 techniques that keep showing up time and time again, that's probably the one that I want to go ensure either A, my current coverage, or B, build the coverage if it doesn't exist. Because that's the quick win. That's the one that everybody uses. If I play the whack-a-mole game of doing all of them, then what am I doing, right? Like, so especially when time's of the essence, like internal SOCs have less time than people on potentially like the vendor sides, like ourselves in cases.
Yes. That's a cool perspective, and we're going to talk about that. And yeah.
Excellent. Sorry, jumping ahead. I guess that's what
Thank
happens when you don't read.
Thank you, co-host. Co-host Nas over here.
Yeah, I'm the guest at this point.
Thanks, Paul. Cool. Next.
Yeah. So basically, I took this example of like PowerShell set execution policy, and like the average detection engineer or the average TTP, as we like usually joke, is when you see who am I, when you see PowerShell, when you see all those very good load bins, you'll get interested. So that's the basic like thing. Let's imagine ourselves like we've seen this string. The approach that people usually take is that the first thing is you validate that you have coverage. Say you've already seen set execution policy, but this time it is like written in line. Like there isn't like /c, there isn't some shenanigans in the command line, and you might want to make sure that you detect it. You might want to use like atomic red team or your favorite thing to confirm that you have coverage. But let's say that you do not have coverage for this, okay? For the sake of argument. So what you're going to do is the very basic example that many people would do is you would execute it, okay, in a safe environment. And the classic way of doing detection engineering is you spray and see what's happening. So you either be collecting all the logs from your machines into a CM, or you're looking locally into the event log. Supposedly you enabled the logs, of course. But in this specific case, I reduced the command to just be PowerShell set execution policy bypass, blah, blah, blah. I executed it. And this is the sysmon event. Yeah, this is the sysmon event for that like command. So a very typical approach, if you're thinking, okay, so I executed the command. Now I have the process creation event. The next thing that I would say, okay, I can detect this via this event log. Okay, so next I will write a rule for it. And it would look something like this if you're writing Sigma. If you're writing your own query language, it would look a little bit different. But the idea is the same, is that now you will contextualize this data that you collected and put it in a query language format. And in this specific case, let's assume that I did a very raw translation, meaning that I read the report, I've seen this procedure, I've tested it, okay, I can detect it with process creation, I implemented it to the T. As you can see here, I've used the command line set execution policy and bypass, which were both present. And I make sure that the image is PowerShell. So like, generally speaking, that's the mindset that you would go through. Like, okay, so I have this procedure, I might execute it, whether it be like Kerberos roasting, whatever, and you would look for a event. If it matches your expectation, then happy life. Now you can call yourself a detection engineer. You made a detection. But.
Next slide.
Yes.
Oh, nope. There you go.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So we've mentioned this, I believe, in the topic last week, and we've talked about this a lot on Twitter, is that, and I believe many people criticize like the open source detections around. They say, oh, it's very brittle process creation, blah, blah, blah. So because process creation is the most prevalent, so we write detection for it most, and it is the most, like the easiest to enable, quote unquote. So as this meme shows you, is that even though you wrote the process creation rule, there exist other log sources such as ETW, registry, script block, etc., etc. And like I say, the average detection engineer, but in reality, it's about the tooling that you use. So if you're using, I don't know, you're using sysmon, that are expected like telemetry. If you're using Sentinel, or you're using EDRA, BC, everyone has its own telemetry. And the real question becomes is, did the rule that I write, is it enough? Or is it not enough? Like, should I increase coverage? And we speak about increasing coverage a lot. Like, why the process creation is brittle in the first place? What makes it brittle? And why is it interesting to write detection for other log sources, for example? Okay, so to answer this question, actually, now Paul might want to jump, but to answer this question is, there is this hierarchy. Okay, so I made this very rough drawing because I don't have scales, but the idea is, in detection engineering, it comes down to where you're actually located, because a researcher on a vendor side or an internal team is very different. If you're an MDR managing multiple CMs and multiple EDRs, it's different. If you're an EDR, it's also different. And if, like I mentioned here, like the dedicated team and the YOLO engineer. What I mean, like the YOLO engineer in this case, is that guy who does pen testing, does detection engineering, configure the firewall, does everything. So the time management aspect is very different depending on what you are, where you are located here. Okay. So
Is this like the pyramid of detection engineering then? Is that where this is headed?
I don't call names. So if you want to call it that, yeah, probably. We need to make it colorful first. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, but like this is like many people miss this point because like when somebody shared detection, let's say I share a detection. So I work for company X. I share this detection because I spent, for example, a day on it. But someone else might have a black hat talk in 6 months, and he's spending, I don't know, 6 months on it. And it's a very different perspective. Like he might discover other things, he might learn stuff. And like, as I've noted, like in the free section below, those are like consideration. Like, should I take care of false positives? What about false positive? Like, am I creating this detection for myself, or am I creating it for the world? And as we've seen, like the log sources, is ETW important? Should I create the same detection for different log sources? Do I have time for that? Blah, 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 blah. So that's the general idea, I would say.
Yeah, sometimes I do feel when writing content that I'm just like scratching a surface on the actual issue itself or the type of event data or something. And I think I was looking at Stopound recently, and I wrote like such basic content for it. And I was like, I know that once I get LDAP query logs, I could write content for that. And I had a bunch of issues getting LDAP logs, and I was just like, screw it, I'll come back later. But yeah, and it's an interesting, I don't know what the right word, fallacy or.
I think part of that is, right, when you have to pull the data sources manually for yourself, right? If you're an internal org and you are pulling Windows event logs, you're pulling your proxy logs, and you're shipping them into your own SIM, and you're doing all that work, it becomes problematic and tedious because you have to then go, oh, well, I don't have that, so I need to go get it. Or I need to then work with Team X, who's going to make the GPO to ensure LDAP logging occurs on the domain controllers, verbosity. So, and that's where I think tools like EDR or XDRs, who can collect those things, right? Basically, some of them are mostly, if you turn on that specific thing in GPO to log the 4688s or the 5145s, etc., the agent will just default collect it. So if you enable it, it'll just collect it for you and put it into the SIM. And that's where I think standardization and normalization of data is important. But in this context, it's thinking about breadth, right, which is one layer, kind of where we're starting. But then how do we go for the depth? Because we talk about things like, well, it's brittle, or if you change this, it's now the analytic doesn't catch it. So I think there's variance to both. And specifically, I think breadth is fine, especially in the context of like vulnerabilities that are just dropping, and you have potentially hours before you're seeing exploitation and your org's impacted, but there's no patch. Well, who cares if it's brittle if it catches the thing and you're able to respond to it? So I think that's where the balance comes in, is that you potentially start off with the breadth of detections. They're simple, they're brittle, but they work. And then you, over time, can then work on figuring out like, okay, what is a test that changes this and now evades that? And then I can focus on building the depth of it to become more resilient to those changes. And I don't have to play the whack-a-mole game. But being the YOLO people, like most of the people things are going to sit there, and it takes time to either get a dedicated team or have those dedicated hours to then build the better detections. But I think if it's brittle and it works, who cares at that point, right? Like you're still winning.
Yeah, exactly. And the most important part of all of this is time, because like, how do you say, a dedicated researcher on a specific technique, or let's say you're working at a product level design for EDR, you're discovering log sources. You can't compare yourself to somebody else working, like having only 2 hours a day to work on detection, and he does the false positive tuning and he does this and that. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, I think it's known, but it's good to repeat it. And as we go through the slide, we'll show the different perspective of why it is important to write these kinds of, like, how do you say, overlapping detections to increase coverage from the different spaces. So, all right. Yeah. So in that specific case that we've took of the set execution policy, you can see that on top, it's the 4688. So let's imagine a case where what's the advantage of 4688, or what's the difference, I should say. Like, you can see that it doesn't have process like parent command line, okay? And this is on newer version. On older version, I believe there wasn't even a parent image on the 4688. And the idea is, you can see it even below, the script block text is also collecting set execution policy. And why does it matter? Because you made an assumption by seeing that TTP, seeing PowerShell quote set execution policy, and you tested it. And for some reason, you don't know yet, but for some reason, you get a process creation event, and it's fine. But let's just imagine a moment where the threat actor actually, instead of typing all of that command, he typed PowerShell first, he entered the session, and then typed set execution policy, blah, blah, blah. You wouldn't see the process creation event, because that's not how process creation works, okay? You would see it in a script block text. So your assumption now starts to change, because your first thing said, I covered the TTP, and that's fine. But if you did a little bit of research, or you switch a little bit, and by the way, this is the same TTP, meaning that we're still in PowerShell level. We're not talking about API, or we're not talking about going in depth. Like, the same set execution policy executed in different contexts might change. Like, a lot of people, I believe, were surprised to know that there is a Mandiant blog from 2017. They talk about when you type CMD commands in CMD, they are not logged, except if you type what I call a command handler, like /c, and then you type something. Then you can see the internal command of batch. But if you don't, then your assumption is incorrect. And as we said, do you have the time to spend on that? But it's something good to keep in mind, that what is presented in a blog post, or what is presented in a threat report, is usually the actual TTP. This variation of many other variation, we're presenting it to you. And one of the things that, as a detection engineer, you should keep in mind, which is something I love to do, is take phrases and classify them. I call them future idea research. Because let's say somebody said, I loaded the DLL VR on DLL, some Raspberry Robin. He said, they do this and they loaded VR on DLL. The next question should be, can I do that with Reg SVR? Can I do that with, even at the same level of utility, you need to ask these couple of questions where it becomes more thorough and more interesting for you to increase your coverage and understand if you're actually detecting the thing or not. So, yeah. Good. Yeah.
I was going to say, the only thing I was kind of thinking about when it came to the interactive command execution is, I remember a lot of EDRs. I mean, years ago, EDRs struggled with that, to begin with, collecting people interactively running things. And I remember when I think it was the preview of Windows Subsystem for Linux came out, and I had tested it, and it was just completely invisible to EDRs at the time. It was just this is too new, too cool, man. And I hope today it's being collected. I don't have I don't have it, I guess, to goof off with a fancy EDR anymore, but I don't know if Paul has a fancy EDR that catches WSL interactive commands.
I don't know. I wish I had access to one of those. Spend my days just making memes and posting on Twitter.
The solution to that, Mike, was that I believe Microsoft introduced called WSL plugins, and it's open source. Yeah. But the cheat they did is they created Windows Defender plugin, but for the rest you need to create your own. So good luck.
All right.
But there is no login. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is, I believe, this is another example of PowerShell Classic. Yeah. So if you type the command in process creation, it's like if inline, it's also shown in PowerShell Classic. And you might not know that log source, but it's interesting too, because the attacker might disable your process creation, but he forgets this, vice versa. So that's also another aspect of that discussion. Okay. Yeah. So what did I do here? Yeah. Okay. That's the point here. Yeah. What this slide mean? Yeah. This slide is, I wanted to highlight another point, which is sometimes we read a TTP and we take it as granted. Like, okay, this is it, that's fine. But in this specific case, let's say you never heard of set execution policy. What is a policy in the first place? So one of the steps that you should do is not take that command line and try to implement detection for it, but instead go read about it. And as we've seen here, like, okay, so there are other execution policy. You say bypass is the most dangerous, but perhaps unrestricted is interested for you because it allows you to do other things, perhaps not as cool as bypass, but it is interesting nonetheless. And by reading this or going a little bit further, you can now enhance your detection to include, as we've seen in the Sigma, like, okay, now it has bypass, but let's add unrestricted, for example, because I find it interesting. That's another aspect of how to approach a report. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something when I saw this again just now, even like the IEX, right? Or even just like the different download methods in PowerShell, and I think Sigma has that rule where it's like the multiple ways. But the IEX piece, invoke expression, I always think about how when they shorthanded like this, it's just like, one of the many things to kind of monitor for.
Yep.
Next slide.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the next evolution of this similar idea, is that once you research these things, you learn that PowerShell 7 exists. Okay? And PowerShell 7 is a little bit different than PowerShell 5. And perhaps you have both. And then you learn that execution policy can be set via the registry. You don't even have to call set execution policy, like the CMlet. And then you'll go a step beyond that, and you'll learn that PowerShell 7, since it's cross-platform, they actually offered you to set a per-user set execution policy inside the configuration file, which the content of a file is not collected at all. Like, you're screwed by that. So then you'll have to do something else. And the PowerShell 7 actually read the configuration of the file and like modify the execution policy. So that's, for example, something that goes beyond the basic TTP that you started with, and you started adding layers to start and understand the whole aspect of just this set execution policy. And you can, as Mike said, the IEX can be written in invoke expression, and you can execute stuff with not IEX, and you can download stuff with like a system.NET web client, but you can use other things, and you can use and customize variation. And this is where it becomes difficult but interesting.
Yeah, even the process name, right? Like 7 is different than just your standard PowerShell exe.
Yep, and I love this like fun fact, which is the PowerShell team. I shouldn't say this, but the PowerShell team, the original file name for PowerShell 7.exe, which is pwsh.exe, the original file name is pwsh.dll.
Oh yeah,
changed
yeah. I remember.
just because.
And that's the other piece too, right? Like, adversary gets on the box or renames PowerShell, then now you need to look for internal names. So your Sigma rule here, like just expanded, multiple command lines and process image names, original file names, and
Yeah, I think that's where then, instead of focusing on like specifically PowerShell itself, you have a rule set that looks for mismatched process names versus internal names, right? So things that commonly do that. Common tools, whether it's their lull bins or external tools like Sharphound or Mimikatz or whatever, right? Like using that's where you can then start to build coverage and kind of go for the depth and different ways to look for that activity. So I think that's one of those things of, well, if one thing fires, that's like got a specific weight to it. But now if I have multiple things firing from different points of view or data sets, then now that particular grouping of events is now interesting, or more interesting, I should say. Sometimes by themselves they are, but sometimes by themselves they're not. So I think it's an interesting idea of overlapping and different ways to think about it of, well, if they can do this with PowerShell, could they do something similar with something else? And I think that's where like a good idea of the internal versus original name is handy.
Yep. Absolutely.
But that's neat on the config file. I did not know about that for PowerShell on Mac or Linux.
Yeah, but it's limited. If you can read the documentation, but in PowerShell 7, it's limited a little bit in Mac and Linux because some configurations do not exist. They exist only on Windows. But it's pretty fun. The point is, by the way, in PowerShell 7.2, the manifest for the log didn't even install itself by default. They fixed that on future version of PowerShell 7. So you could have installed PowerShell and the script blocking wasn't even enabled on your machine. It was, I believe, when you do the installer, it was a check called install provider manifest, or you had to do it manually. You went to like the installation file and you double clicked some ADMX file or something to get the group policy. But it's fun. Like you could the funny thing is that right now, a threat actor can bring PowerShell 7 and you'd be blind. Because it logs the PowerShell executable, it logs into a different channel because it's called now PowerShell Core instead of Microsoft Windows PowerShell. So that's a small change that you can take, but how do you say? It all depends on that pyramid of detection engineering that Mike's called it. But it depends on your time. Like, do you have the time to invest this amount of information or do you not? And sometimes, by the way, what's sad is that when a red team discovers something and publishes it, it gets used. But when you discover something like this and no one knows about it, it's never used. It's a useless detection. So tweet about it. That's the first thing you do to get people to use it.
The more people use it, more visibility there is.
Yep.
I mean, it's going to be used regardless, right? But give me the chance to do something with it, right? That's the other aspect of it. But sometimes we don't get those opportunities.
Yep, that's why you need an atomic test.
Or many. Variance.
Yes.
Yep.
Almost like a harness of tests that can help you validate different ways of using that. Interesting idea. Somebody should run with that.
What should we call it? I wonder.
Atomic test harnesses or something?
Yeah. That sounds fun.
Quick, somebody go make that repo.
Yep.
All right.
All right, Naz. Now we're dumping LSAS.
Yeah. I actually put a screenshot on answer stuff. Nice. Yeah, that's the next evolution of like the detection engineering idea. So to not get lost, I want to get back to the original. Like, just imagine we're just reading a report for the first time, and we're doing the smash and grab. So we grabbed a lot of things, and sometimes our source of information isn't necessarily a blog, but a tweet. Okay, so somebody on Twitter said, "I achieved this." Of course, you take that claim with a grain of salt, but what you do internally is that you actually go test it, especially if it targets you, for example. So in this specific case, is what I want to show is someone, I believe Mr. Dogs on Twitter shared this, and he said that you can use this utility called dump mini tool from Visual Studio to dump LSAS, okay? And he shared this screenshot below saying you need process ID, dump type, etc., etc. So if you go Google this, like you might find, I believe, an MSDN on it, but the idea is this, is that somebody shared the TTP, but in this case, it's a undocumented TTP. So now you are in a, in a state where you have certain information, but it's undocumented. So you take it as it is. What you can do is you can start testing it as the classic test, and you say, okay, I execute it and it's fine. But the funny thing, if you go to the next slide, is that since it's .NET, we can easily like screenshot the source code here. But what's fun is if you took that screenshot from the tweet and wrote a detection on it, and you assume that those are the parameters, then it's fine. We detected it as it is. But if you look at the source code, actually the flags do not mean anything. Okay, only their positioning means something, because as the source code shows, it doesn't care about your dump type or whatever. It's actually saying args1, args3, like the positioning of the argument, and it's assigning it to something. So writing a detection for it now becomes tricky because you don't have CLI flags. And the positioning is interesting, but the positioning is just a file name, the PID, and the dump type, which is full dump or something like that. And this is an interesting thing in detection engineering, which is going a little bit beyond what's giving to you and going into uncharted fields, because now you're actually doing the engineering thing of detection engineering. Like you are creating the detection, and sometimes you're discovering things like you're like similar to a red teamer perspective, but in this case, as I documented here, is the arguments are meaningless, only their position. So technically, you could write dash Mike, and the first flag is the file, and dash Paul, and dash blah blah blah, and now you use like a contains saying I use this flag, but now maybe you require a regex because positioning is important. So a regular expression might make sense here. And yeah, the point here is that it's hard and it's not as easy, and you shouldn't take things at face value. I believe Adam on Twitter, Hexagon shared a blog post on this saying you should go beyond what's already giving to you, especially in the load balance. And by the way, I did this exercise on load balance, and I encourage people to do it. Many things shared as a load balance sometimes are just, how do you say, the tip of the iceberg. If you go deep, you'll discover a variation, or you'll discover something new. And I find that interesting. But that goes a layer deep of the detection engineering process. When you read a report, you should keep that in mind, that not everything is given to you, and not everything is searchable or chat GPT-able.
Yeah, I think, gosh, it was a while back when Paul and I were ripping through Impacket stuff, and it's just having that source code. It always just makes me wonder. I mean, outside of like, I mean, it's easy for anybody to just pull it down and rip it, right? Like and it works or whatever. But the variation ones, the ones that are taking it down and modifying it and running it to evade everybody's default commands and stuff, like with Impacket, it's just like, and it keeps me up at night because I have no idea what people are doing with it. And
I'm less concerned in that case because, again, when you have different approaches or hopefully overlap in those capabilities, it's changing. Like, okay, Impacket uses BCO or whatever. The default, I think it's 6 characters. It's like BCO,
Yep.
something like that. Okay, like you change it. Or you look at like the default naming convention of Covenant or Cobalt Strike or anything that uses the service creation functionality. PS exec, right, is a great example. Like you can hard code those, you can absolutely change them. But if you focus on, again, then going that one step further of new service creations, right, completely different log source, 7045s, you're looking for those, or 50, whatever they are. I forgot there's 2 of them. Right, it's the idea of variance. And so I think also understanding that that's where you go are at the baseline when you start. You know, if you're getting into building detections, that's where you're at the breadth. And then you start to say, okay, well, PS exec creates a service, Impacket creates a service, C2s create a service. At some point, even though they may do different function calls, they all end up doing the exact same functionality. There's the registry rights, they're going to hit RPC or ETW logs, and then you have something there. So I think that's where you then start to go from your beginning parts to you're building your breadth and your knowledge and understanding of overlaps, or how you build more resilient detection. When you start to kind of change your thought process of, well, how does this get bypassed? I think is another step in that direction of like where you're starting to grow the maturity aspect.
Yep.
Mimikatz.
Yeah, and the
Doesn't
final
an
point.
EDR just stop it?
Mine does.
What?
Yeah, like
Sorry, we changed the conversation to Mimikatz and how EDRs prevent it. So anyway,
Bring that famous black hat screenshot.
yes.
Anyway, I don't want to
Yes.
say it, but you know it. Okay, so this final point that I wanted to highlight in this detection engineering journey, from reading a simple TTP to going the different depths depending on where you're located. And by the way, something to highlight is that if you stopped at the set execution policy and you didn't have the time, you didn't do it wrong. Okay, let's get that right. The most important thing is you need to be aware that you didn't cover everything. That's the most important thing. It's not about that, okay, you did process creation, but that's, how do you say? That was one task of your many tasks during that day. So your excuse, quote unquote. But the point is, keep it in mind that there are different, like the typical iceberg meme, like you're in the top and you're going below. And as many great people have shared from Spectre Ops, their capability abstraction, and the Jared Atkinson work about his like graphing things and stuff. Those are all things to be inspired by. But how do you say? It's not to say you should do this without this or this without this. You should do all of this. Okay, depending on your time, everything should be done. Everything that we've spoke about today should be done to your capabilities. Okay, the final one is, which is the most like less likely one for the average guy, is, as you've seen Bohops tweeted about this. But you might say, no, it's fine, it's fine. You might see this tweet and you see run DLL, blah blah blah. Okay, process creation, end of life, end of story. So, but an interesting aspect is to find these new log sources, because let's say you executed the TTP and all of your log are empty. Okay, we call it like, oh, it's doom and gloom. We can't detect this. The next step you go after is to like determine, is there a log source that we are not aware of that might log this? And in this specific case, let's say you wanted to go a step beyond, and you'll discover that any JScript activity, for example, that is used on the system is logged in this specific ETW, which log this and log other stuff. So now you have an extra layer of understanding, an extra layer of coverage that a threat actor might not be aware of. And you just increased your defense in depth, meaning that now you have different sources that you might want to collect if you find it interesting. And this collects like extra information that you cover yourself from every side of the equation. Okay.
I feel like it should be rebranded to detection in depth. Right? If we're specifically focused on detection, we should be thinking detection at depth. And that's the idea of overlapping and stacking them, right? Going at different layers of your capability. This is interesting. I didn't actually know this existed. So EID5, so I had to write that down so I don't forget, because that's a really interesting data source that I'd like to go explore more.
Nice. Okay.
Cool.
And we did it in 45 minutes, but that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. we can jam now.
Speed run it.
Oh, that was good.
Told you. Look, we got like 13 minutes before the adversaries are back doing stuff, and some of us have to go back to work and do those and find them.
It's like Final Fantasy time.
Yeah.
Hey, don't divulge my secret stuff.
Or Helldivers. It's Helldivers now.
Yep. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. Yeah. Hopefully it was interesting for most and something new along the way. But I just want to point out that threat report is only a start of the idea. You should take a threat report as your starting point and not just something you digest and you extract and you move on. You should, like, over time, for example, something interesting is if you read 10 reports about a single threat, you might want to like see the different perspective from different teams. Like Splunk might release a blog about something, and like Palo Alto might release a blog about the same thing, but from different perspective, and you might learn a thing or two. But should always think in this, how do you say, going down the mountain or going up the mountain. Something like that.
And I think that's a good perspective too, right? When you are thinking about the same, let's say, like threat actor or piece of malware, having those different viewpoints is important because what one org saw may not be the same as another. And so you can then start to see the differences, or, hey, here's the overlaps. So then I can, again, start to say, well, if I start to see similarities, right, that should bump up where I should have analytics, or maybe things that are different, right? Like things like mutexes are like a great source, right? You can use mutexes to hunt, especially hard-coded ones. Like look for the commonality, look for ensuring, especially those that are unique. Or named pipes is a great one.
Yes, and I just thought of it, which is not every report is important for every organization. So if you're reading reports, just remember one thing: reports are marketing at the end of it. Okay, so when you read a report about CVE, you cannot cover everything. And going back to that graph, when you're doing detection, you need to prioritize certain things. Like you might read that, okay, people might use, there is this famous like GitHub project called PowerShell DLL that can use run DLL to execute PowerShell. And the idea behind it is that since PowerShell is implemented in that DLL management, system management something, is that you can use the same functionality to load that DLL and execute stuff. So you might say, oh, I don't detect that. But the question you need to ask is that, do I have coverage for basic PowerShell first? Especially if you live in that YOLO land. And this is something just to keep in mind, is that don't be, how do you say, this is, for example, why something like Sigma or something like Atomic Red Team are very, very helpful for the average guy, because like Atomic Red Team has 17 million tests. Like, even if you never thought of it, you will find it. Yeah, it's actually insane. Like they have different variations and different tests, and they go far and beyond. Like it's a product for free. But the point is, you use this utility to prioritize, and you keep in mind this depth mechanism in your head. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, kind of back on the point of, I was thinking about like somebody new getting into the industry, because getting into the depth of something like MSHTA and or JavaScript and Run DLL32 and all these pieces, it's kind of thinking from like a new person perspective. If like you're getting into detection engineering or tier 1 analyst or whatnot, something that I always recommend to people is when you're looking at it, write it down and blog it. Whether it's been blogged 100 times or 2 times, it's your perspective, and it's kind of like that voice, your voice putting into whatever, into your blog about how you tore it apart as a new person. I always think it's important to recommend that. Just, I don't know. I think it's neat, and it's good for people to try to blog those things instead of just keeping it internal and not writing anything about it. I think it's good to get it out there.
And I think sometimes you come across those posts and you kind of read it and you may get a little lost, and you're like, it's the meme of, step 1 in drawing the owl, and then step 2 is draw the rest of the owl, right? Like sometimes as you're new or trying to learn those things, it's hard to connect how those pieces came to be, or like if there's like instead, because sometimes like you can't just step out, I ran this command and then this command and then this command and did all these things like that in the blog. Sometimes you, for brevity's sake, you take some of that stuff out. As a new person, you kind of sometimes need those specific steps to help you do that. So sometimes it's good. Obviously, time is finite for everybody. So when you're putting things out, like that's your opportunity as a person to write that. So it's on, should be zero expectation of how deep you go into it, other than you've shared some knowledge in the hopes of helping somebody else and sharing what you learned along the way, right? So do that, write it for yourself, but also just remember that sometimes like it's not easy to find the thing that helps you go ABC. Sometimes it goes step 1 in drawing the owl, step 2, here's the rest of the owl, and you're like, well, now what? But it's part of the learning process. Hopefully there's a lot of great resources out there now. I think 10, 15 years ago, that'd be different, but there's so much content capability, from Sigma rules to atomic tests to blog posts from vendors, but also independent researchers or private blog or personal blogs. Like, there's so much good information now.
Yep, big time. What else? Is there anything left?
I think we got it.
I don't know.
Right?
I don't know.
I don't know.
We can speak about hidden log sources. I have a couple.
Yeah.
I will not share those. Those are my OSTs. Hidden log sources, yeah.
Oh, yes. Speaking of OST, boom. We have our slide.
I forgot to. I wasn't here last week, so I couldn't drop it. We'll drop it later today. But the bracket is ready. I have to fix some dates and times due to, again, missing a week. But the bracket will be ready and be launched today.
Awesome. It's exciting.
The
Favorite C2?
specific, yeah, it's pure popularity contest. There's no, you literally are going to vote each round, basically like an actual bracket.
Are we going to do like
into this?
Are we going to do a favorite red team after that?
Probably
Ooh.
should. Like favorite threat actor, I guess.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get an APT sponsor. Okay, nice.
Yeah, with some cool marketing for it. I mean,
Yep,
our
that's
intern's
nice.
doing a pretty killer job on some of these graphics.
We should bring him in. Next, I say we. I mean, I'm the third unofficial. I say we. I don't know why. Like I'm here every week. I don't know. But the point is, we should bring him in.
Yeah, see how he goes through his process of building these from scratch.
Yes.
Yep.
Where do the ideas come from?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
What else do we have happening? I think
What's
next week
we got
next week is Harrison, I think. I need to reconfirm with him.
15th.
Yep. Oh, next slide. Yeah. Harrison on, I want to call it like the convergence of AI and threat intel, because there's a mix of AI in it. So I think it'd be kind of cool to see like the intelligence and the generative AI stuff mixed from him.
Are we gonna use
live-
AI to detect AI?
Live AIs.
Are we gonna
will be
build
talking.
AI live?
I'll have to ask him. He may make the AI live. Living. And then the only other, okay, so Andrew will be here on the 22nd with potentially another guest, which would be really cool. And then I think Andrew's going to do, I forgot it already. It was
I think we're going to go over Dackles.
Dackles and
5136s. Let's let them rip.
Yep. And then I have Anton in for the 29th, where he will talk about, big purple team piece. It'll be with Vector and Kubernetes. So if you want to geek out on that, we'll learn some Kubernetes.
But purple content on Purple Madness. The last one.
The last one.
Everything else.
No big deal.
Well, we're going through the shades of the rainbow.
Yeah. A little violet here and there, but that's okay.
Yeah,
you know?
A little blue here, a little red there, a little purple here and there.
Come on, Nas. Nice. You're part of the show at this point. You should know this.
In reality, it's shades of purple.
That was a joke, but
some are more blue, some are more red.
I mean, the picture, where's it at? There was a picture. This picture has, there's shades.
Yep.
The fingers actually look somewhat correct, I think.
Yeah, I think the left hand's a little, it's like it's backwards but forward, but that's okay. I don't think anybody will notice.
I think it looks okay compared to whatever happened in the last one we tried to do, where those hands were just.
Yes.
Oh, it's the hardwood floors in the middle of the forest.
Oh, yeah. We got to do our bloopers. Yeah,
we'll have a special slide.
We have 2 things set up, I think, for what's after this month. April.
Yeah,
we do.
2 things. Yeah, we do.
Oh, yeah.
We have.
I do remember this one.
Ben from Trusted Sec. He will be here to share Impede.
Very
and all of its cool pieces, which is pretty dang cool. They just integrated Atomic into it. And then we have another episode with a recruiter who recruited me back when I was 18 or 19. We met. He recruited me to my first gig, and I thought I'd bring him in. I think it'd be really cool to kind of do like everybody kind of does like a show or a podcast about like how I got started in InfoSec. I think it'd be neat to do like how to get your resume like to and past the recruiter. So I think he's been doing this for like 20 years or something, long time. So I think it'd be really neat to bring from like that perspective, like as a IT and security recruiter, these are some tips and tricks.
It's career day.
Yeah. Atomic
But
career
instead
day.
of
We
going
should,
to parents, going to work with your parents, you're going to bring your parents to work with you.
yes, on atomic on a, right.
We should throw it on a Monday this time.
Yeah, we should. Why not?
Do whatever we want.
No,
Well,
take that.
what about you, Mike?
Unfortunately. So,
Where is the
Fortunately, yeah.
new episode?
so yeah, we got a lot going on. I kind of feel like I want to take 2 weeks off after this with March.
Yeah. I mean, I thought we were going to do 4, and then you told me that March has 5 Fridays. I was like, yeah, we can do 5. Like last year, doing 4 was.
And then I found out that the actual like March Madness basketball thing it's like starts late March and it goes to like early April. And I'm like, what? Why?
Yeah. Well, there's things that are hard to explain about that, Mike. Time is just a construct, so
yeah. March 2020.
Has it really been 4 years?
Yeah.
Well then,
It's insane.
on that note, we should probably leave before I have an existential breakdown. The fact that 4 years is gone.
Yes. Nas, thank you so much.
Yeah,
we really appreciate you. Three episodes in a row is a lot.
I just appreciate you all having me on the show. I love being a guest.
It's been great, Paul. Appreciate it.
Maybe we'll catch you back on sometime. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Atomics on a Tuesday.
Yes.
Nice.
Catch y'all later.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank y'all. Have a good day.